We are going to be looking at, here we go, the Mosque of Cordoba. And this was part of the early European colonial Americas unit. So that would have been your Unit 3. And this is an Islamic piece of architecture. So it's functioning, or it functioned as a mosque. And so that's how we're going to talk about it mostly throughout this lecture. But it has an interesting history. It transforms multiple times. The site is used for multiple things. In fact, let's start there with that context. This site, if you kind of took a time machine back to the Roman era, on this site and plot of land, you'd find a Roman temple to a god named, I'll spell the name for you, Janus. And so Roman temple at first. Then in about the 570s, like early on 570s ACE, the temple gets overtaken, and the whole area gets overtaken by a barbarian group called the Visigoths, and they changed the temple to a Christian church. Now, fast forward a little bit more, and the church then, once the Islamic forces come into the site, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, you have the Christian church then turning into a mosque. And that mosque, it grows and is added to over about a 200-year time period. And, different rulers adding on their particular addition to the mosque site. Then in 1236, so we're in the 13th century, it then becomes once again a Christian church, specifically a Catholic church, which it still is to this day. So if you're looking at this image and looking at this particular structure here and going, hey, wait a minute, that looks like a longitudinal planned, Christian basilica, you are right. And so that's part of the story, that how the site evolved, and that was added later on. Now, this particular slide is showing you, again, part of the context and how this particular family, the Umayyad family who built the original mosque, got into Spain. So if you're looking at this page, the green area here is under the direct rule of a group called the Abbasids. I'm not too sure how to pronounce that. But they're in power, in this city right here, specifically Damascus. We're going to mention here are the Tigris and Euphrates. So this basically, they're ruling the Middle East. And there's a rival family dynasty called the Umayyads. They're going to be ruling in red. You can see that down below in the box on the lower left. The very last box, the Umayyads. We talked about that family with the Pixis of Al-Mughira. And so the Umayyads, get overthrown by the Abbasids and get basically thrown out of Damascus. So they make their way over to this area. So in Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. Here, let me show you this. So the Umayyads established their power then in the Iberian Peninsula. So that's part of Spain, Portugal, a little bit of southern France, and all because they were overthrown in the Middle East by the Abbasid rule. So that's how they get over to, Muslim people get over into that area of Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. So who's the guy who basically starts all this? So it was a prince, Al-Rahman I. He is the one who escaped and went to basically Spain. And he wanted to create his power, establish his family, and create basically a new Damascus in this city called Cordoba. He began elaborate building projects, promoted agriculture. He even, trying to create this new Damascus, he even tried to, and it succeeded in importing in orange trees from his former home, which you can see a little bit still here in this courtyard. They would not be growing natively to Cordoba. So he really had this vision of creating a mosque and a city that would rival, if not overshine, definitely Damascus. But the building, the mosque, would outdo any great religious building that was known throughout the world. And so that's the mosque we are going to talk about. So let's go back to the beginning and just look at this and talk about the main parts. First of all, you've got a minaret. Now, the original minaret is hidden basically under this square, more traditionally Christian bell tower. But originally, it was the minaret. You have a courtyard here with a fountain in the center. This is where the orange trees are, and you've got a covered walkway that surrounds the perimeter of that courtyard of orange trees. You've got here the main bulk and body, if you can imagine this kind of not being there initially. This was the hypostyle hall. And if there's anything that really basically is the show-stopping image that identifies and makes Cordoba's mosque special, it's the hypostyle hall. And if you remember a hypostyle hall, we talked about that way back in Egyptian times. It's even like the ancient Near East, that you have a large room filled with many columns, and the columns are holding up the roof. And I've read, I think there are 800 plus columns in this hypostyle hall. And what is very interesting and important about the columns is that they are examples of spolia. They were built with ancient Roman columns. So these columns that you're seeing here, definitely part of a Roman temple, Roman buildings, and of course using spolia, in this case the columns, showcases your power over that group, or that your religion's power over that other religion. But really what you're probably looking at is these candy cane striped arches. And in fact, the hypostyle hall here at Cordoba has a 2-tiered arch system throughout the entire hypostyle hall. Now, a couple things. They're stone and red brick. This type of red and white striped arch was seen in other architecture in the world, but the arch shape itself and the color combination is very much a Visigoth architectural arch. In fact, let's go to the arch type. Let's talk for a second. The shape of it is a horseshoe. And so here it is in an actual image you need to know, which we'll talk about. But here's a drawing that I came up with. I did not draw this, but it looks like a horseshoe. The arch is more dramatically falling or sloping down. It's not as gentle a slope as it is for a traditional Roman arch. It's a much more dramatic fall, and it looks, again, like a horseshoe. So that comes from Visigoth architecture, and it really is, along with the red and white stripe, characteristic of Western Islamic architecture. So architecture that you're not going to find necessarily in the Middle East, but architecture instead of Islamic origins that you'd find in the Iberian Peninsula, like Spain. So here that is, and they are stacked one arch on top of another. So as you look back into the hypostyle hall, this prayer hall, you have this beautiful, repetitive, geometric, colorful series of arches that really open up the space, give it decorative kind of ornamental detail, just capture your eye and make this a very special place. So the hypostyle hall, incredibly important. Now, in the hypostyle hall, where the people would come to pray, you face something called the mihrab, and I spelled it here for you. And this is the image that you need to know for College Board. The mihrab is a prayer like a niche cut out into a wall. It'll be the most ornamental part of any mosque. It's where the person would stand to lead the prayer. And it is based basically on the ideas of Muhammad, and Muhammad being the prophet of Islam, or one of the prophets. And he would stand in his home and discuss his religious beliefs to his followers. And so this is, in a way, trying to honor that, recreate it in some sense or some way. And the wall itself, where the mihrab is located, so if you think about being in the hypostyle hall, you're praying towards the mihrab. The mihrab, this prayer niche, is in a wall called the Qibla wall. And that wall shows me, and the mihrab shows me, what direction Mecca is in. Because you want to pray in the direction, facing Mecca. And Mecca is important because it is the birthplace of Islam. It is the birthplace of Muhammad. And that's where you pray toward in the hypostyle hall. So this is the Qibla, and it's beautifully covered in gold mosaics, got the great horseshoe arch. It, again, is the most elaborate part of the mosque and in the hypostyle hall. It is covered with, again, this beautiful calligraphy of Kufic, which I talk about in the Pyxis of Mughira. Kufic, which is the Arabic script, and it most likely is the writings of their holy text, the Quran. And so that surrounds the mihrab in many places. And then also you see like plant life, intertwining very elaborate decorative elements with plant life. And in Islamic religious art, you rarely, if ever, see figural art. No animals, no people. It just is not done. So that's why you have typically as decorative elements calligraphy from their holy text, the Quran. You see beautiful plant life, and the plants most likely are there to suggest paradise. So that is what I would talk about when discussing this. The beautiful, again, Western Islamic style horseshoe arch here, dramatic, fall here. And again, this is in the Qibla wall in the hypostyle hall. And this is where the faithful would come to pray in the hypostyle hall and face the mihrab, which shows you the direction of Mecca. So the gold tesserae mosaic pieces you could talk about. If I showed you the dome above, it's a beautiful golden dome filled with mosaics. It's really beautiful. Now, this is a picture of the mosque from afar and a bridge that was later put in, a very Roman-style bridge, in fact. The bridge would leads to the caliph or the ruler's palace. So it would connect the holy mosque with the ruler, showing his power over everything within the city. And so that's there. And they have a similar picture for College Board with that. So again, in about the 1200s, Cordoba was conquered by King Ferdinand, and he built a royal chapel within the mosque. You're looking at that here. They covered the original minaret with a more traditionally Christian-shaped bell tower, again, calling the faithful to prayer. And so that's really what it is today as well. It is a Christian or Catholic church. And there have been discussions and debates about this site, whether it should be opened up to be able to house Islamic worship and Catholic Christian worship as well. So that's an ongoing discussion within this piece. But beautiful site, beautiful building with a really interesting history, a little bit of mosque architectural terms with the mihrab, the horseshoe arches, the Qibla wall, a minaret we've already gone over because of the Hagia Sophia. And again, knowing the history of the site and why Cordoba became a site that was important for Muslims in this time period. So that's the Mosque of Cordoba. Again, the second of our 4 pieces of Islamic art within the Unit 3 Early European Colonial Americas.